Good evening, everyone, and welcome tonight. I'm Dr. Jeanine Abrams McLean, and I serve as the Vice President of Fair Count. Fair Count, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that works on building long-term power in communities through every iteration of civic engagement. You might know us from the census, voting, redistricting, vaccine work, all types of civic engagement. That's what we do. And I want to welcome you to tonight's event, Walking and Wellness and Wholeness, which is a discussion focused on self-care for clergy. We are joined this evening by pastors, faith leaders, and doctors so we can have a candid, real conversation about COVID-19, vaccines, our community, and most importantly, self-care for the faith leaders who have helped shepherd us all through this terrible pandemic. I want you to know that this is a conversation, so it's interactive. If you have questions, type them into the chat and we'll get you the answers that you need. Before we begin, I would like to say Happy Clergy Appreciation Month to our clergy panelists and to all of you who are viewing with us tonight, joining us tonight. We celebrate and thank the clergy, all of our clergy, for all of the work that you are doing and that you will continue to do. Now, I'd like to introduce our special guests who have joined us tonight. I'll call on them and they will introduce themselves and bid you a welcome. So I'd first like to start with Reverend Ralph Thompson from Columbia Drive United Methodist Church in Decatur, Georgia.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ralph Thompson, and I serve as the proud pastor of the Columbia Drive United Methodist Church here in Decatur, Georgia. I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation on self-care. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Pastor Thompson, Reverend Thompson. And so our next guest is Minister Denita Hike, who is a lead faith organizer with us at Fair Count. Minister Denita, will you please introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Denita Hike, Minister Denita Hike. I am the visionary of D Hike Ministries as well as Kingdom Ladies Emerge Ministry, and I'm just happy to be here on tonight talking about clergy and self-care, a very important topic. So I'm excited about the conversation.
So happy to have you, Minister Denita. Our next guest is Reverend Brian Tillman, who's the Director of Inclusion and Advocacy for the North Georgia United Methodist Conference in Atlanta. Reverend Tillman.
Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you and these esteemed colleagues on the panel today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Meg-gan O'Reilly, who is a staff psychologist and program coordinator of outreach, equity, and inclusion at Stanford University. Dr. Meg-gan, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Meg-gan. Like you said, I use she, her pronouns. And, there's a lot of overlap between psychology and clergy, the witnessing of the wounds and the healing of a community. So just honored to be here on this very important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we are so happy to have this esteemed panel joining us tonight for this conversation. So let's go ahead and get started. What we know is that pastors have been given a unique role and responsibility beyond most of what most others can comprehend. With this higher calling, it can even come with even more lofty expectations. Pastors are human with limitations, and yet many clergy are ministering beyond their limitations, and some of them don't even know. The result is burnout or dropout. Pastors and church professionals have overwhelming responsibilities when they serve others. These responsibilities can be daunting and often leave them emotionally drained and isolated. So we're going to tell you a few statistics from a 2020 report from Pastoral Care Incorporated and a 2019 report from Mental Health Ministries. And so the entire panel is going to share some facts and tidbits. So the first fact is that over 1,500 pastors left the ministry every single month last year. 1,500 pastors left the ministry, what they were called to do. 72% of the pastors report working between 55 to 75 hours per week. If you've done a 40-hour week, then you go ahead and add those extra hours on. 55 to 75 hours per week. And that was before the pandemic. So you can imagine what they're doing now. I'm going to turn it over to Minister Denita.
Also, 84% of pastors feel they are on call 24/7. 65% of pastors feel that they have not taken enough vacation time with family over the last 5 years. So those are some really, really, really high percentages, and we have some additional information from Reverend Thompson as well.
Wow. Well, thank you, Minister Hike. These statistics are sobering. 40% of pastors and 47% of pastors' spouses are suffering from burnout, frantic schedules, and unrealistic expectations. 70, that's right, 70% of pastors don't have any close friends. I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Brian Tillman for some further statistics.
Thank you. Doctors, lawyers, and clergy have the most problems with drug abuse, alcoholism, and suicide. 45% of pastors say they've experienced depression to the extent that they needed to take a leave of absence from ministry. These are devastating facts, but it is the truth, and we have to address it.
Yeah, these are definitely devastating and sobering facts. And what we're here to talk about tonight is that self-care is the key for pastors to stay healthy. During our time today and during this discussion, we will be led by Dr. Meg-gan and the clergy assembled here. We will do an Ask the Doc and allow you to ask the doc as well. So please, as we go through this conversation, please use the chat to ask your questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first Ask the Doc question about COVID-19. Reverend Tillman, what question do you have for Dr. Meg-gan?
Sure. My first question is this. What have you seen as the impact of COVID on healing professionals?
Yes. So we know that COVID has impacted all of us. I like to say it's happened to a million people in a million different ways. And so, but for the healing professionals, this was kind of our time to shine in a way. That a lot of people started realizing that they had things pre-COVID that were exacerbated by COVID. Be it grief and loss that was re-triggered with the more grief and loss, be it substance use, be it connection with family and peers, every domain of life that you can think of, financially, of course, as many of us lost our jobs or had to be put on hiatus. Every domain of life was in need for guidance, holding, and healing. So people started turning to their healing leaders, right? And so we were answering the call, but there's 3 things that I saw that really impacted healing professionals. One is the demand, the spike in need for that type of attending. Secondly, our own humanity, right? Our healing professionals are people too. And so as while their community that we serve is going through these different hardships, so were we. Same things with family loss, job stress, financial issues, inability to movement and connect. And so for the first time for healing professionals, instead of, counseling from a different position, like let me hypothetically put myself in your shoes and counsel you, we were actually counseling on the issues that we were going through in real time. And that could allow for some more insight, but it also allowed for a lot of burden as well. I remember counseling people around racial trauma when I was going through it myself too. So that was a main one. And those 2, the demand and our own humanity, navigating that, leads to what our stats were hinting at, the burnout, right? A lot of healing professionals started to find themselves overtaxed in the middle of when we were needed the most. And so that introduces a very difficult conundrum of, do I look after myself and feel like I'm abandoning my community, or do I stay in the work at the tax to myself? So a lot of us had to navigate what felt like an impossible choice, but we really needed the time for self-care was right now.
Thank you.
Wow.
Also, Dr. Meg-gan, what is a good definition for self-care?
Sometimes when I get a question about definition, I like to say what it's not first. And self-care is one of those buzzwords. And whenever something becomes a buzzword, it loses its original definition, purpose, and power, right? So self-care is not selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care is not self-indulgence, right? These are two terms that, especially in faith traditions, especially in collectivist cultures, we really pull away from, right? We don't want to be too self-centered. We don't want to be too overindulgent, right? So it's not those things. Also, in healing spaces, self-care is getting a bad rap as a term. We like to even think about community care now. But if I were to define it, self-care is how do you maintain and invest in a relationship with yourself, right? I don't know if any of us are Ayana Van Zant's fans, but she likes to say that you are the representation of God in your own life. And so when you attend to you, you're attending to your representation of God in your own life, as well as those other representations. But this one comes first, right? So self-care is all the different ways that we get to know ourselves, that we keep ourselves healthy, and that we have relationship with the self. And I really love talking about self-care because for me, it's deeply grounded in the idea of your inherent value, your God-given inherent worth as a person, right? Think about anything you value. You spend time with it, you protect it, you get to know it, you nurture it, right? You give it what it needs. And so basically, self-care is you pouring that into yourself. That's how I would define it.
Thank you, Dr. Meg-gan. And before we move on, I think especially now in the pandemic, and like you said, self-care, if you look at, go on Twitter or Instagram, you see hashtag self-care. Organizations are implementing self-care days and hours and encouraging their employees to practice self-care. So it's very easy to say it, but it's hard to know what to do. And a lot of people really don't know, like, they have time to do self-care, but what is that? Does it mean I have to go pay somebody to get a massage, or can I read a book? So can you tell us, some examples, and maybe some of the panelists can really, if you've been able to practice self-care, some of the things that you actually done.
Yes. I love this because sometimes we may want to, but we don't know how. So I do think we should go around and share some of our own. But as an example, I do want to say at the top of this that I think capitalism has co-opted self-care. And now it's like, you got to buy this, you got to go on this package, you got to travel to this place. And then if we're not careful, self-care can become another obligation. Oh, I got to take care of myself today. I got to go do this. When really that means you've lost what the real message is about already. So going back to the idea that self-care is replenishment for you, is time for you to witness and get to know yourself. Really, self-care is self-defining. You get to determine what it is that sparks you, that rests you, that protects you, that you enjoy, right? So for me, self-care includes dance, even if it's just living room dance while I'm sweeping. That's some of my best moves right there. Self-care also includes my intellectual life. So I like to read, right, and watch different programming. Self-care also includes nature, right? I'm solar powered. I like to say I hate being cold. So sometimes I just get outside and get the sun on my skin, right? And a lot of us, self-care is also our spiritual life. Not just in our role, but also that quiet time, what we're manifesting, what we're trying to bring in, what we're putting out into the world. So really it's self-defining. And those are some examples from my own life. What have y'all been up to for self-care? Can I tag you, Denita?
Oh, sure.
For me, I think self-care for me kind of it translates into me setting certain boundaries. And in setting those boundaries, one of the main things that I had to do, especially with being in ministry, is setting time frames of when I was just not available. Stop accepting phone calls after a certain time on the day, because I had people when they want prayer, when they have an issue, when they need someone to talk to. It doesn't matter. They don't look at the phone. They don't think about the fact that you have a life, that you have a family, that you may also have a full-time job. So self-care for me is just setting boundaries, and I've learned that boundaries are for me. I can't necessarily force my boundaries on another person, but I can make sure that I stand firm in my own boundaries. So setting boundaries, basically my spiritual, also taking time for my devotion and not just reading the words to prepare to minister, but to my devotion and my meditation to pour back into me. So those are two of the things that are very important for me where self-care is concerned. And taking time with my family, just saying, look, I'm carving out this time to be with my family, with my kids, my grandkids. So all of those things are self-care for me. So I think, like you said, everyone has something different, but definitely setting those boundaries for myself has been huge.
Yeah. Let me jump in. Let me call one element of my self-care the sacred solace of the SOD, the SOD. Every Friday, especially during the summer months, I will cut my mother's grass. And that's a time where I take my radio and I turn it up as loud as I want it to be. And I will get a little bit of physical activity, do a little bit of meditation, sing, listen to sermons while I'm on the riding lawnmower. And I find that to be very therapeutic on every Friday. And also, I have a standing invitation with the track. And every morning when I walk, I do the same thing. I put my earplugs in, my earpiece in, and I listen to what I want to listen to, and I enjoy nature and walk and talk with God, and just really enjoy what's going on around me. It's very centering.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I guess it's my turn. Dr. Meg-gan, you might like this part. I keep a really good therapist. Is one thing I do for self-care. And full disclosure, I generally intentionally choose a Jewish therapist. There's some things I'm dealing with at church that I don't want to mess up somebody else's church and faith, and so I choose someone from a different faith tradition. And so for me, that's been a Jewish therapist, and it's been very helpful for me to be my best self, for myself, for my family, and for my church. Another is taking trips with my family and with my wife without the kids. We will leave them with family, friends, or strangers. We don't care which one. And we're going somewhere every year for a week, at least. This year we took 2 trips without the kids. Because we spend more time with them now, and we need to invest in our relationship as well. And so that's also something else that we frequently, regularly, consistently do and invest in. And I also want to give some direction here scripturally. God created the earth, and then God rested. There's examples of Jesus in the scriptures. I'm thinking about Matthew 14 in particular, when he receives word that his cousin John the Baptist has been beheaded. What did Jesus do? He was in the midst of ministry, and then when he finished there, he sent everybody away and went off to be by himself, to tend to himself. And so we ought not to put ourselves above God and feel that we can do and do and do and do without pouring back into ourselves. It's spiritual care that we are doing with taking care of ourselves.
Amen to that.
Yes.
This is great stuff. I might take some of these some of these examples that especially the boundaries part. That's really, really wonderful. And this is just a reminder to all of you who are sharing in this broadcast with us. We want to hear from you. Tell us some of your what you do for self-care, and also take a moment to drop your questions into the chat. And as we while we're having this great discussion and dialogue, I also want to share with clergy and lay members who are watching with us about free resources that we have here at Fair Count that can help you take a little bit off of your plate. So right now, let's go ahead and hear from Sierra as she shares information on how you can receive this free gift for your church and your pastor from Fair Count for Clergy Appreciation Month.
Hi, I'm Sierra and a faith team member and technology associate here at Fair Count. Fair Count has committed to continued civic engagement by implementing the FAIR program in collaboration with Fair Count's faith team. The FAIR program, which is short for Faith and Innovation Resources, has served as a gateway for faith institutions to communicate and collaborate with their local communities. Our resources that we provide for our partnering faith institutions range widely from virtual tech support to software assistance and even assistance with managing and organizing day-to-day tasks. On that note, a gem that the FAIR program proudly gives to the faith community is complimentary church management software, the Faith app. As a quick disclosure, although we use the term church, we openly welcome all faith institutions of all denominations. The Faith app bridges communication between church clergy and its congregation. The software offers unique features such as using the forms feature to get volunteers to sign up for events or keep track of surveys for your congregation, provide instant messages or emails to all of your congregation with a single message and a single click to deliver to everyone at once. It also collects and tracks tithes, gifts, and offerings through a digital link or a simple text message. There are so many features that helps with the church management and admin tasks. You can see and experience all of them during our live demonstration at our office hours every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Additionally, you can visit faircount.org/faith to register for the office hours and to register your faith institution with the FAIR program. You may also email faith@faircount.org if you have any questions about the Faith app or the FAIR program. Thank you for all that you do. Ciao!
Thank you, Sierra, for sharing with us about our faith program. We are back and we want to continue our discussion about self-care for clergy. We have another Ask the Doc question. Pastor Thompson, what question do you have?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Meg-gan, my question is, why is it hard for clergy to include themselves in their circle of care?
Gosh, Pastor Rob, I think there is a lot of reasons, and I'm just going to walk through a few, and I ask those watching to kind of check in with themselves, see which one of these reasons or multiple of them might resonate with you. How do you know if something's resonating? You go, ooh, you feel that lands, or you feel a tightening in your muscles, like, oh, I feel red right now. So as I'm going through these feelings or these potential reasons, let's check in with our bodies. One reason is actually the one we just mentioned. Sometimes when we don't know what self-care is, if it's not readily available to us in our mind, we might just kind of keep it moving and skip over it. Another reason could be we might not had it modeled to us by our family of origin, our primary caregivers, or our peers. Sometimes when we're hustling and other clergy are doing the most, we do the most too, right? So sometimes it can be an environmental pull to do more. But the bigger one that I think personally is that a lot of times the people that find themselves in clergy roles are called, right? This is a part of their ministry, their heart, how they move through the world and how they vision themselves as in a service. And so with that big heart, when you're giving, you're actually getting something back. We feel good when we're giving, right? And so then it just becomes a question about what degree, right? Think of it like nutrition. Something can be good for you, but if you eat just that, then all of a sudden you're off diet, you're off skew, right? So even if you're replenished by giving, there's still an upper limit, right? So not knowing what it is, not seeing it done, not being rewarded by it, but doing it a little too much. Those are all some reasons. Also, sometimes we can have a self-sacrificial definition of self-care and giving, right? But to Reverend Brian's point, there's a lot of notes in scripture about replenishing the self, right? And being your best self for yourself. But if we're still working from that self-sacrificial place, we might miss the boat where it's time to pour that back in. So those are all some very real reasons that we can kind of forget ourselves, right? And then again, the need is so high. Sometimes it's really hard to set a boundary when you see someone you care about struggling. And so we can talk a little bit about how to share the load and how to uplift or delegate different things to other people so we can all carry it a little lighter together. Those are my thoughts.
I love that. May I ask a follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of clergy, it seems, seem to take it as an admission of weakness if they set aside time to care for self. Do you have any suggestions about how clergy might approach that guilt?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it is guilt. Thank you for labeling that emotion. So let's talk about guilt first, right? Because guilt can kind of weasel its way into things and cloudy a lot of things for us. Guilt is a pro-social emotion, meaning it helps us get along with each other. And it emerged for two different things. Guilt is a feeling we feel when we did something we shouldn't have, or we didn't do something we should have, right? And the guilt you're referring to is the latter. We feel like we're not doing something we should have, right? And so then I do a lot of excavation in my work. Sometimes psychology is more archaeology, like where did this narrative come from? Let's keep digging, right? And so oftentimes there's a discrepancy between reality and expectation. When we're feeling guilt for something we think we should be doing, but we're not, then we feel like, oh, I got to push down this feeling, which is data to me, and keep doing this thing anyway. So I think what's happening here is in the role kind of defined in the job description, you need to be available to people. So if you're not, are you not doing your job right? Right. But how available and how do we stay available? What's the sustainability of availability if we're not full up, if we're not replenished ourselves? So we oftentimes within any narrative, you got to get into the nuance and see what are the gears that are working here and who is it serving? Eventually, given those statistics, if we burn out and drop out, then the community is really not served, right? So we got to think long game and we got to think replenishment.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Meg-gan. I know I'm not clergy, but I am soaking up all of this for my own life. We understand that the demands of ministry are endless. That's a lot of what we've been talking about. There's always more. There are always more tasks to be done, and some tasks that need to be done better. Sometimes the pastor burdens him or herself with unreachable goals. Most of the time, it's the congregation that has unrealistic expectations on their pastor. So we have a question from one of Pastor Thompson's members, a member of Columbia Drive United Methodist Church, or the Drive. And so this is a video question from that member.
Hello, everyone. I'm Deborah Constable. I am an associate professor at Georgia State University and a deaconess in the United Methodist Church. And my church is Columbia Drive United Methodist Church. Dr. Meg-gan, my question is, how can we as members support our pastor in healthy self-care practices?
That is a lovely question. Yes. And I like it because it flips the script on the onus of self-care, right? We're talking a lot directly to clergy members themselves on what they need to do. But when we really get into it, self-care is a community event, right? Everyone has a role to play. So I do have a few thoughts on this. One, as individuals, as the body of the church, it could be nice to have three people as your go-to people. So one could be your pastor and then two other members. Why is that? So that one go-to doesn't become the end all be all and then the burden, the one pillar holding up the roof, right? If each of us have three people that we go to, it's sharing the load, right? And you can kind of rotate through those three people. And they might even have different expertise, right? Because your pastor doesn't do everything, right? So right there, you're also starting to parse out what is realistic for any one person to hold. So have three go-to people for yourself, right? That's a part of your own self-care. Then secondly, I think it would be nice to know a little bit more about the role of the pastor, of the leader, right? When are their peak seasons? What do they have going on in their life, right? Sometimes people share, sometimes people don't. But do they have elderly family in their life right now? Anyone with elderly family during COVID had a lot more to think about, right? Anyone with young kids had a lot more, orchestration to do. So know a little bit more about their world beyond their role and know when their peak seasons are, right? So you can be a little bit more mindful and intentional about when you lean and maybe go into one of your other go-to people. And then there's this idea of checking in or consent. So when you are going to go to them to lead and get some support, you can say things like, is now a good time? Or when can you drop me in your calendar? That's a lot. That gives them the clergy members some room to say, let me get back to you. Or yeah, can we call you back? Versus, hey, do you have a minute? They're going to say yes, right? As they're growing in their own boundaries. So that little conversational difference of a bid for consent or a check-in on if they have capacity can make a world of difference in how you land on them. And then there's your own self-care, right? I like to think about self-care like hydration versus thirst, right? When you're thirsty, what do we do to water? We guzzle it, right? It's all spilling and we're not really careful with it, right? We're kind of wasting it. But if you're hydrated, if you keep your self-care like hydration, where you're just staying on a baseline level, then when it's a hot day, you're not too parched because you have a back store, right? When you take care of your own self-care like hydration, you can weather a little bit more and handle a few things on your own a little bit more until that bigger thing comes. And if we're all doing that like a community, then our pastor has a little bit less to hold at any given one time. And so taking care of ourselves, asking to check in, knowing them beyond their role, and knowing when their peak seasons are and having others to go to is what I'm thinking.
Have mercy. I just, I think you would make an excellent preacher because you worked that analogy. Let me tell you something. You worked that
She worked it, didn't she?
Yeah. I think you're ready. Thank you for that.
I received that. Mm-hmm.
that was great. And this whole discussion has been just so wonderful and powerful. One, I'm the daughter of two pastors. So I have seen personally what, like the demands that are on ministers. And my parents are retired and they still have demands that come on them. And full disclosure, Pastor Thompson is my pastor. And I really do try not to, and it's not that I try not to bother him, but I also try to see if can I figure this out on my own before I inundate him with, something, also knowing that everybody else in the church is doing it. But I never feel bad when I do that. I always, and I know that I can go to him whenever I need to, but I try to be cognizant of the fact that he has a life, he has a family, and he has all of these other responsibilities. And so I think that across the board, members can do this and really just, I know when things happen to us, we think like we're in ourselves, but just take a second to think about, what we can do before we make that phone call, before we send that text message. And so I do try, Pastor Thompson.
You do a wonderful job.
I do have one other thought, if I may, and that is the idea of congregational care.
That's right.
That all situations do not require a pastor to be there, and there are some ministries that can be started at churches to help them in the caring aspect. One of them is called Stephen Ministry. I'm not sure if I'm able to promote a ministry, but this is one that I've always invested in, where we train lay people in how to provide really good care to one another. And there are times that you can call on a Stephen minister, and they can be there, and they can be there longer, for a longer duration of time. I can be there the first day when a tragedy strikes, but there's others behind that. And so who's caring for them after that? And for me, in my context, has always been Stephen ministers that I've been able to call upon. And so it's one of the best investments I can make as a pastor, is to empower my congregation to care for one another and give them the skills and the training they need to be able to do that.
All right. So as we come to a close of our discussion tonight, I would like to see if we have any questions for Dr. Meg-gan or of any of our panelists from our viewing audience. And don't forget that you can still drop a question into the chat, and we'll do our best to get it answered. One question that has come up is about how do we uplift pastors and their families? And I want to take it a step further because we think of their families, but also one of those statistics that we saw was about pastors and spouses, right? So divorce rates, and you heard Reverend Tillman talk about taking time to make sure that he and his wife have time together. And so I want to also bring in those first ladies and first, husbands of churches and faith institutions. What can they do? Because they have a lot of burden on them at the same time. So, Dr. Meg-gan, what advice can we give to spouses and partners of faith leaders?
I love this question because it includes the word uplift. That's one of my favorite words. And a lot of times uplift means lifting off, like taking things off their plate that we've been talking about today. And so this really does allow. This is a nice invitation.
I think she's preaching. I think
maybe I'm feeling it. This is a lovely invitation for us to go deeper on that note of getting to know the person beyond their role. And so what do they have going on, right? How many children? What are their ages? What are the milestones, right? And then how can we carve out space? Space and time is such a valuable resource that a lot of pastors are going without, a lot of families are going without, right? So how do we pour back in? So knowing what's going on for them, and then having that pastoral care of different services. I like when leaders can normalize going to couples therapy, having family days away. And, didn't grow up in a pastoral family, but there's pressure on the kids to present a certain way, right? All of us want to, show our home training on the street, but how much more so for the children? So allowing them to be messy at times, make mistakes, not setting the bar too high for them, right? Not treating them differently. And so really just throwing our arms of normalcy, humanity, and care around people and treating them much like we would want to be treated. Is my thoughts, but I know there's others in the room.
Wow.
I'm always happy to share. One is, I think, we as clergy sometimes do ourselves a disservice. There are times where our congregations, erect a pedestal for us, and it's up to us on whether or not we're going to stand on that pedestal. And if we do, we then oftentimes pull our family on there too. And we create a fishbowl that they then live in. And it's really just unhealthy. I'm also a clergy kid, and I experienced that very heavily. It's a wonder that I'm still in this, in the ministry after that. But it's something I've been very careful about with my own children and with my wife as well, that people understand, as Minister Denita Hike mentioned earlier, that there are boundaries, and that my family is not fair for attack and ridicule and criticism and so on. And so you can be upset with me, a decision I made or what have you, but if you go to my family, better be in prayer.
Amen, Reverend. Amen.
Oh, we
Wow.
have another
You know,
question. Oh, go ahead, Pastor Thompson.
no, I wanted to just say that there was an occasion that happened, and I'll make this quick, several years ago, where there was a member in a former church that expected my wife to be on call as much as they expected me. And I had to explain to that member, listen, I'm your pastor. And if you can't reach me, you definitely can't reach my wife because we're probably together. And so, I want to, Dr. McLean mentioned it. There are some times where congregations do their pastors a great service by saying, Pastor, we recognize that you are human. You have human issues, human problems, and we're going to honor that. Shout out to Columbia Drive. I've got to say this. On my pastoral review every year, I can never get as high a score in self-care as I do in all of the other areas. They do that on purpose because they want me to know that they're never satisfied with self-care. They want me to push the boundaries. So thank you, Columbia Drive.
Yep. And so
you sit on that committee.
Yes, I do. And so we do have another question from our audience. It comes from Mark, and he says, as a staff minister at his local church, how can he recognize that his pastor needs self-care, and how can he support that? What are some signs, and that pastors are actually in need of self-care?
Mm-hmm. There are signs, and I'll let some of the leaders talk about some of their own signs. But from the outside, some signs can you never get a hold of them? Are they running from thing to thing, like behaviorally, visually? Are they always busy, frantically going from thing to thing? That speed, that pace of life gets stored in the body. There's a lovely book called The Body Keeps the Score about how stress and trauma gets housed in us. So are they literally frittering from thing to thing? And then also another sign might be the presence that they are with you. Sometimes if they're so stretched, it might not feel as close and intimate. But those stats that we saw as well, not having any close friends. So when they're talking, is it one way or is it two way, right? Do we make room for them and what they have going on? That stat really hit me, that a certain percentage don't feel like they have any close friends. And that's to Reverend Brian's point, that it's lonely up there on a pedestal, right? And the air is thin up there, right? So how often do you see them just out and about, slowing down, talking about other things in their life? Those would all be signs. And also then physically, do they look tired? I know black don't crack, but sometimes we can show some of our symptoms of, hydration, moisturizer. Sometimes if we got bags, we've been up late. So really looking at a person in the eye and really trying to see what that spirit has been holding. Those are all signs. The other signs are a little less clear, right? We know that substance use went up during the pandemic. We know that weight went up during the pandemic, and everyone has different body size. But there was a lot of us that didn't get to move like we used to. We're at home, sitting sedentary a lot. And a lot of us in the Black community can turn to food for comfort or even boredom eating. And so it's really hard to check in about someone's weight, but that's another less visible, but also a sign that we could, try to be putting things together and saying, how is this human? How is this body doing? Mm-hmm.
I'd like to add to that if possible. I think one of the things that can take place is just coming to grips and coming to terms with that clergy person is a person. They are human. Sometimes there aren't particular signs. Just know that they have a life, they have a family, they have a job, and sometimes you have to just put yourself in their shoes. Would I be able to work a full-time job if you're not full-time ministry, drop children off at extracurricular activities, anything else. If I have elderly parents, as well as a congregation of 5, 10, 50, 200, 2,000 people that are pulling at me. So sometimes it's just simply just just caring enough to understand that that we're busy. Clergy is busy. Ministers are busy. Ministers have lives. So even if I'm showing up with my made up face, my nice outfit, my lipstick, still understand even beyond what you see. Just put yourself in my shoes, knowing what my current situation may be. And also to clergy, it's okay to sometimes be transparent. I think oftentimes we put on superwoman and superman vest, and God, he didn't want us to be super. He just called us to walk in dominion and power that is fused in us from him, So I think if we stop just walking and talking and acting as though everything is well, everything is great, then we offer the opportunity for our members or our following, whatever it is that we have, to come in and say, hey, what can I do? Or let me just do this for you. But because we don't want people to think that we're quote unquote weak, because weakness a lot of times is equated to anointing, and that's not true. We don't want to show that. We don't, because if we're weak, we're not anointed. God didn't equip us. We weren't called or chosen for this particular task, and that's not necessarily the case. Jesus is the only one who got on the cross, who died on the cross, who was resurrected in 3 days. None of us did that. Can we do a good work? Yes, most of us do a great work, I'm sure. But it's very necessary that you should not be pouring from a half full or an empty cup. You can't. You've got to have some overflowing. Something has to be overflowing. So, just for members, pay attention. Recognize that clergy is human. And for clergy, recognize that you are human. And that it's okay to say that you need or you just need to step back. It's nothing at all wrong.
Amen. I have something to add here as well, and I'm sure Pastor Thompson does also. Look at the church calendar. If you look at the church calendar and you have events every weekend, you have stuff all week in the evenings, your pastor's probably not doing well with self-care, and you're not helping. And so, that's a challenge is looking at church calendars. We've served at different churches. I've served at large churches, some smaller churches. And regardless of that, the calendars have always been full. There's always events almost every night, every weekend, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, Sunday afternoons. That's probably a clear-cut sign. If you see your pastor at all those events, they're probably not taking very good care of themselves. And so what can the congregation do to help with that? I've seen churches address this in very creative ways. One church that I was most recently at, the senior pastor did us all a solid, the whole staff. And that was, he created these Sabbath rest weeks for the church, where we were not going to have any evening meetings, choir rehearsals, Bible studies, anything that weekend. That week is a Sabbath rest week for the whole church. Y'all go home. Watch some TV, spend some time with your family, have a family dinner, do something else other than come here. And it also gave the church building a time to rest, to be clean, to be maintained, to fix stuff. And those were scheduled throughout the year, 4 or 5 of them throughout the year. One of the best things that we did. But that calendar has to be addressed. We cannot schedule and expect our pastors to always be there. And in multi-pastor sites, if you have one pastor, you have the pastors. You don't have to have all of us there at one time. These are just some simple things that I think can really help us do a better job of caring for our pastoral leaders.
I just want to add one thing to that. Is check the calendars now. So I think that people, you think about the church being full and activities and everything going on when we were worshiping in person and having events in person. But the same thing is happening to congregations across the country, even in the midst of COVID, because people think it's easier to do a virtual event. And so you might stack things on top of each other. But, I think that this is a problem that has followed us into the virtual portions of ministry.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. McLean. One of the things that I have enjoyed are just the sage comments by Minister Hike and Reverend Tillman. I would say this to churches as you seek to help your pastor. Over and over in the Old Testament is the connotation of the patriarchs leaning as they served God on their staff. We know that was a physical staff, but the connotation of staff denotes that those are persons that the pastor can lean on, right? And I hear you. You're saying, look, we can't make budget. There are so many other things that we can spend money on besides another staff person. I want to encourage churches to get creative. Find a team, volunteer some time, take some of the load off your pastors, and watch how that pastor rebounds and springs to life because you have become staff, if you will.
I love that. Love that. And I know we're getting towards the end, and I want to, and we'll wait to see if we have any other questions coming from the audience. But I really want to take a moment and thank each of you for joining us tonight. We have gotten some gems from everybody, all of you that are on this panel. I'm getting text messages from people who are saying, I'm not even clergy, and I feel this was for me. So you are really, making a difference with this discussion. And it's been so uplifting. And it's a starting place for pastors to start taking care of themselves, start taking care of their temples. And as we, go into our final the final part of this, I have two things that I want each of our panelists to do in your final remarks. I want you to just give y'all preachers, y'all know how to do final remarks, right? All right. But I also, in those remarks, I want you to include one thing that you are going to implement for yourself, your self-care, and then one call to action for other members of clergy. So one thing you're going to do for you, and then one call to action for other members of clergy that are watching this. And we will start with Minister Hike.
Okay, thank you. Again, this has been just amazing. Being able to be a part of this today. Like I said, I've also been trying to jot down a little notes to the side while we were speaking as well. So I really do appreciate it. But one of the things that I'm committed to doing for myself is continuing with my boundaries, but also just getting getting some care for myself as far as a therapist. Because there are some things that sometimes ministry gets heavy, and the ministry that I feel the most in is with women who are trying to live past pain, whether it's domestic violence, rape, whatever. So that can get heavy. So just getting some help for myself, someone that I can speak to and pour back into for my self-care. And one of the things that I guess a call to action for clergy for me would be to just, recognize that you are a human. And I love, when Paul tells us to not be conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And I think that as clergy, we have to be renewed spiritually, emotionally. Those are just things that we have got to be able to do. So find that balance. Clergy, find that balance between church, the congregation, family, and your me time. There has to be a balance there for you to be able to continue to pour from your cup. I remember going to Pastor Leadership Conference, and one of the questions that Bishop Jakes asked was, what happens to the sheep when the pastor is no longer available? And so that doesn't necessarily have to mean that the pastor has passed on or left. Sometimes we can go so hard that we check out and don't even realize it. We're just going through the motion. So self-care allows us to always be available to the function of the Holy Spirit. If we're not getting that self-care, oftentimes we are functioning from a carnal mind, functioning from flesh, functioning from an emotional stance of what we're dealing with personally. So always make yourself available to the unction of the Holy Spirit so that the sheep don't go astray because we refuse to take self-care. That's my advice.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Denita. I love that. Reverend Tillman, your call to action and what you're going to do for yourself.
Thank you for this opportunity and for each of the panelists, for Dr. Meg-gan and for Dr. Jeanine as well. For myself, I'm already working a new plan. Like many of you, I've gained the COVID-19, and in my case, the COVID-30. And so I'm going to take some advice from Dr. Thompson and spend some time on the track or my neighborhood, walking, eating better food, not stress eating or boredom eating either. And so that's a focus for me that I'm working on right now. And a challenge to the clergy is something I learned from a layperson, actually, several churches ago in pastoring. And somehow we got onto a topic about pastors and burnout. And she was a clergy spouse, and her husband died early because he was just taking on a lot of stress and died of a tragic heart attack. And she said one of the things that she wanted to make sure that I knew and heard from her is that she believes pastors more often do not burn out as much as they suffocate from the lack of the word of God in their own lives and study for their personal selves rather than preparation for the congregation. And so I challenge each of us to make sure that we are not suffocating ourselves, that our very breath and being comes from the word of God, and we need to stay in that.
Wow. Pastor Thompson.
Wow. Well, let me first say, I'm getting ready to close. Thank you, Fair Count. Thank you, Faith Team. I appreciate that you have taken the time to reach out to pastors in this very, very meaningful way. Dr. Meg-gan, thank you. We don't have enough time, so we need to hear from you again. Thank you for your kind and sage words. My challenge to clergy is to understand, like Minister Hike said, like Reverend Tillman said, that you are not Superman. Again, I think about Moses as he was fighting a battle, and his task was to hold up his hands so that Israel might win. His hands got tired, and every time his hands would fall, Israel would start losing the battle. Your people cannot win if you can't keep your hands up. And so understand your limitations. Understand that you're going to need somebody on the left and on the right, in the front and behind you to keep you uplifted so that you can do what you are called to do. Man of God, woman of God, understand that you're not alone and understand that you cannot do it alone. That's my encouragement for you. And for me, I think Minister Hike said it best. I'm going to be more diligent about setting boundaries and keeping boundaries. And I'm also going to follow up on Reverend Tillman's sage advice. to find a good therapist and keep one. I think it's a strong pastor that will do that and not be Superman, Superwoman. So thank you so very much. God bless you.
Yes. And before I kick it over to Dr. Meg-gan, because I want to hear what you're going to do too, I think that that's a very important thing to be able to see your pastor, especially in Black churches, right? We grow up learning something's wrong with you, just pray about it. And we should pray, but we also have tools that we should take advantage of. And so I love, the idea of seeing that example from the pastor of actually taking their mental health, seriously enough to get a therapist. So, and with that, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Meg-gan.
Yes. I am just sitting in such deep gratitude and savoring this time we've had together. Thank you to all of you. What I'm going to do, my commitment is actually something I'm still reflecting on from Reverend Tillman, the pedestalizing that happens. So something I'm going to commit to is being transparent. I'm notorious for, how you doing? Fine. Can't complain. When I can complain, there's a lot going on. So I'm going to start saying, not so well, or didn't get to sleep much last night. I'm just going to start showing up as is so people can receive me as is and kind of know where I'm at. So I'm going to work on that transparency. And my call to action comes with just a few more gems. I learned that when you give away what you need for yourself, you unwittingly make that person a thief. They're taking from you what you need for you. And nobody wants that. That's a lose-lose. So when you give away what you need for yourself, you make that person. All right. So what do we do to combat that? I'm going to take a page also from Minister Hike's page where she talked about boundaries. Let's reframe it. Because a lot of times boundaries, people think, I'm going to police people. You can't do this. You can't do that. Boundaries are actually a loving invitation. You're telling people how to access you. This is the door by which you come in, right? I'm not going to be putting up a fence. I'm just telling you where the door is, right? And so for my students, I say, you're the bouncer to your peace. If it's a black tie affair inside and someone rolls up in overalls, you got to say, you got to go home and change because I'm only accepting black tie affair inside, right? So be the bouncer to your own peace. Lord. Only accept, tell people where the door is. And here's the last one. There's a CPR to self-care. C stands for connect. Connect with yourself, connect with your values, connect with your community, connect. The P is protect. This is the boundaries. Where do you got to say no to? What do you got to hold yourself accountable to? We don't have time for that. Self-boundaries, right? And then the R is replenish. This is the part we have the hardest part on. The leisure, the things you do for their own sake, right? This is the things that make you feel good. So connect, protect, and replenish yourself. If we can reframe boundaries and self-care, we'll be more willing to graciously step into it. And that's my call to action.
Hold on now. You can't preach like that without taking a text. You got to take
can we open up the
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Woo! I tell you. Thank you all. This has been such a wonderful panel. This has just been a wonderful conversation. I'm supposed to say something profound here to close us out, but I think y'all have done it, which is the beauty of having all of y'all on this panel. So thank you. I'm just going to end by saying thank you and encouraging everybody who's listened to this. One, you might want to come back and listen to it again. So bookmark it on Facebook and on YouTube. Share it with somebody else that you think needs to hear this information. And I'm definitely going back to pull some of these gems that I've heard from all of our panelists tonight and to really try and implement them in my own life. So with that, I just want to thank our panelists again. Thank you, Minister Hike. Thank you, Reverend Tillman. Thank you, Pastor Thompson. And thank you, Dr. Meg-gan, for joining us tonight. And I'm just going to close it there. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Jeanine.
Good night.